Reagan's successor, his vice president, George H.W. Bush, was inaugurated in 1989, just as the Soviet Union was crumbling and Eastern Europe was being set free. Very quickly, with the Soviet Union out of the way, George Bush got us into a war with the Reagan and Bush era client state, Saddam Hussein's Iraq. Iraq invaded Kuwait in a dispute over war debts left over from the Iran-Iraq War, when America and all of the Sunni Gulf states had supported Saddam Hussein's attempt first to overthrow the Iranian government, and then his 8-year bloody war fought to contain it, a war that killed as many as 500,000 on each side. Then when the war was over, the price of oil was trading around $10 a barrel, and Iraq was completely unable to rebuild the country, much less pay off all the war debts that they owed to the Sunni Gulf states. The Kuwaitis continued to add insult to injury by refusing to meet and by taunting the Iraqis. And on July the 25th, 1990, Saddam Hussein met with the American ambassador, April Glaspie. And we now have the Iraqi version of their meeting, as published in the New York Times back then, as well as now, thanks to Chelsea Manning and WikiLeaks, the American State Department version of the notes of the meeting between April Glaspie and Saddam Hussein. And both versions essentially confirm that America offered only the mildest of lukewarm opposition to Saddam's threat to invade Kuwait. Glaspie later told the New York Times, "Well, nobody thought he was going to take the whole country. They believed that he was just going to invade and conquer Kuwait's northern oil fields. Part of the dispute was that the Kuwaitis had been overproducing from shared oil wells on the border, which was a somewhat undefined border as it was. And Glaspie told Hussein, 'We are not interested in your border dispute with Kuwait. Secretary Baker has asked me to emphasize this instruction to you.' And so Saddam went ahead and invaded." It's not clear that the Americans deliberately entrapped Iraq. However, in effect, that's what happened. As soon as the British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher challenged President Bush that "You're not going to go wobbly on me now here, are you, Bush?" The British had oil interests in Kuwait, and the Kuwaitis had vast investments in the UK, so even though the Americans didn't have much to lose, their allies the British did. Once Thatcher essentially challenged Bush's manhood, there was no way that he could back down. As documented by journalist Murray Wass and others, throughout the year 1990, the rest of that year, the Bush administration refused to accept Saddam's offers to negotiate on very reasonable lines, just giving him slight access to the Persian Gulf and the ability to save a little bit of face before withdrawing from Kuwait. Bush's government refused to negotiate. They would rather have their war. And so Operation Desert Shield, the giant buildup of American military forces in Saudi Arabia in 1990, became Operation Desert Storm, Iraq War I, in January and February of 1991. It was known as a short and successful war. "We're back," the American political establishment cried. President Bush explicitly said, "By God, we've defeated the Vietnam Syndrome." They had made the American people love war again on this short and simple and easy expedition. It was the era of the New World Order, where the international law of the United Nations Security Council would be enforced by the United States, without the Soviet Union in our way or anyone else to stop us in our new unipolar moment, as Charles Krauthammer called it. That's about all the American people know about that war. Very few probably even remember the story of the ill-fated Shiite and Kurdish uprising that took place in the weeks shortly after the end of Iraq War I. The Americans occupied southern Iraq at the time in the predominantly Shiite areas of the country. Bush Sr. himself put out a message on Voice of America and had the Air Force drop leaflets encouraging the Shiites and the Kurds to rise up and overthrow Saddam Hussein. And the reason Americans don't know much about this is because the Bush Sr. administration changed their mind and stabbed this uprising in the back and left them high and dry to be slaughtered. They allowed Saddam Hussein to keep his attack helicopters and enough tanks to crush that uprising at the cost of as many as 100,000 Shiite and Kurdish lives. Why? It was because in the middle of the revolution, the Bush administration realized they were now reversing the entire Reagan-era policy of supporting Saddam Hussein's government to contain the Iranian Shiite revolution. In fact, Iraqis who had chosen Iran's side in the Iran-Iraq War, people like the Supreme Islamic Council and their Badr Brigade, started coming across the border to lead the Shiite uprising against Saddam Hussein. So the administration called it off. People might be familiar with the Marky Mark movie, Three Kings, which takes place in this context, a gold heist with the failed Shiite uprising in the background of the plot of the movie. But this betrayal of the Shiite revolution then led to a severe consequence. George Bush Sr.'s breaking of his promise to the Saudi King Fahd that America would withdraw its military bases and armed forces from Saudi Arabia as soon as Kuwait was liberated from Iraq. Instead, they decided to stay, and along with the British, announced a policy of a new no-fly zone to be patrolled by American planes over the north and south of Iraq to protect the Shiites and the Kurds from Saddam Hussein's regime. In the aftermath of Iraq War I, it never really ended. They simply began Iraq War I.5, which ended up lasting throughout the entire Bill Clinton administration and the end of the 20th century. Check out my writings at antiwar.com, my show at scotthorton.org, the Libertarian Institute at libertarianinstitute.org, and my books, Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan, and Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism, at enoughalreadybook.net.